Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to take your seats as we begin our final program. As we close this year's Nixon National Cancer Conference, we'll explore the intersections and applications between technology and medicine. As both fields continue to evolve and advance rapidly, a successful pairing of the two could lead to promising and indeed revolutionary results. Stanbridge University is an award-winning healthcare-focused system and a leading innovator in EdTech. The first to introduce the use of synthetic cadavers on the West Coast and large-scale virtual reality in foundational science training, it is leading efforts on the use of AI-enabled social robots in a variety of pediatric therapy treatment settings. It's now my pleasure to introduce Yasith Weerasuriya, President of Stanbridge University, to introduce our final program.
Thank you, President Byron. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please join me in recognizing the youngest president of the Nixon Foundation, an accomplished orator, and his talented staff for their hard work in successfully hosting a very successful second annual Nixon Cancer Summit. To introduce our final panel, I thought I would harken back to a panelist in our beginning panel last evening, Dr. Verily, a mathematician, a physician, and a musician, may I say extraordinaire, who brought humanity to a room full of science with his excellent singing talent. His words struck a chord when in describing the trait he thought best captures a predicate of success. He said it's those who have grit and resilience and the ability to rise from failure and pursue their dreams again and again. And in the race for a cure for cancer, he said that resilience and grit was driven by human moments, perhaps the illness or the passing of a loved one. He reminded me of another mathematician, John Nash, who was immortalized by Hollywood in the movie A Beautiful Mind. In his penultimate moment, receiving the Abel Prize, he said that for all of his journeys in math and science, it all came down to human moments and love. So to introduce the moderator of a distinguished panel of physicians and scientists who would speak about the latest in technology and medicine, I thought I would skip reading his extraordinary list of accomplishments and simply ask him two questions as an introduction. As a member of the healing arts profession and physician, what was a seminal human moment that he remembers? And Dr. Pisters answered that it was over a decade ago when he had a patient who presented to him a Jehovah's Witness that had been rejected by all surgeons previously and had no hope. And he said he and his team took on the patient at MD Anderson. And he said that after a 14-hour operation, that successful surgery is one such human moment for him. And as a second question and a segue to the panel today, I asked him what technology he thought would move the needle in medicine in the days ahead, to which he replied very carefully that it is all of the different chords of artificial intelligence and data science that he believes where we have hiding in the freezers and the servers today, the answers that data science and AI could unlock, answers for the future. Please join me in welcoming a distinguished American teacher, surgeon, and accomplished leader in medicine, Dr. Pisters, who will introduce his panel.
Thank you very much. As usual, we've saved the best for last. And this is an opportunity for us to come together for an outstanding panel discussion. And so with me, immediately to my left, is my good friend and fellow surgeon, Bill Cance, who's a research scientist at GRAIL and has a long-standing history with the American Cancer Society, as well as outstanding service in a number of different academic medical center environments. Bill, do you want to say a little bit more about your background and your current role? And then we'll go to the other two panelists.
Sure. So as Peter said, I've done cancer surgery and cancer research my entire career, kind of trying to bridge the aspects between the lab and the patient and back. So as I've moved forward, working on invasion metastasis during the career, studying focal adhesion kinase as a central molecule, as I went through, I realized I wanted to get to the next level of where we're going to be going. Where's the field taking us? I went to the American Cancer Society, and I met my colleagues at GRAIL shortly thereafter, worked with them for several years, impressed with the depth of their science, the commitment to science, and saw how the early detection is so critical to the next phase of what we do, and how technology is going to be such a big part of that. So delighted to be here with you all and join the panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Now to our virtual teammates. David Agus is founding director and CEO of the Lawrence Ellison Institute for Transformative Medicine and a CBS physician, I believe. So, Dr. Agus, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Do not describe yourself as just a medical oncologist, but give us some insights into where you sit right now at the interface of technology and medicine.
Apologize. Now you can hear me. I am a medical oncologist, and you figure after 3 years of Zoom, I would be better at that, and I apologize. And it really goes to the fact I focus on using technology for disease, and I can't use technology to speak. So it's we had an institute that cares for patients. I had a full day of clinic today. And as well develops therapeutics and technologies to benefit patients. And I also chair the Global Health Security Consortium, or co-chair. So we do something on a global basis, again, to try to understand how to better disseminate the advances we have in cancer to people across the globe. I'm a believer that many of the answers are going to come on the data side, and that we've really hit a lot on the biology side already. And the real challenge now is to look at our outliers, whether it be the amazing responder or the person who doesn't respond at all, and from these outliers, understand what's better. My field has been very good at the mean historically. Now we have to widen our view.
Thanks so much, David. And then finally, Dr. Peng, who comes to us as a physician and a researcher and director of product development at Verily. Thanks so much for joining us. Give us a little more background about where you sit right now and a little bit about the company.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So my name is Lily Peng. I am a Director of Product Management at Verily. I'm actually a little new to this role. I just started about like a month ago, and bulk of my work actually was done at the sister company, Google. You may have heard of them. And a lot of my role there was to apply AI to healthcare. On the research side. And what that meant was, there's a saying, it wouldn't be called research if we know what we were doing. So a lot of that is actually learning from a lot of failures and learning not only about how to apply technology to the healthcare space, but how do we translate that technology into the real world, into real world impact for patients. And one of the reasons behind my move to Verily is that a focus on building those products and accelerating the translational piece. Because, what I've noticed from, my 8 or so years of just working with the Google team is that, we train models every day. Your phone, you can like type in the name of your dog and you can find your dog. So AI is powering consumer experiences all the time, helping consumers and patients, all the time. And so how do we accelerate that translation into the healthcare space? And, not to give things away, but having great data, I think, is a big piece of it. And I know that I'm looking forward to talking about that a lot more.
Well, let's open up the discussion. Probably start with you, Lily, really looking at the reality of how ready is healthcare for artificial intelligence. We see it in all of our daily lives with Siri, with Alexa, with other aspects of autonomous driving, to give another example. Is healthcare ready for AI, or what are the limitations that you see about deploying AI for patient care or for predictive analytics?
Yeah, I feel like we are both so ready like we need this yesterday type of ready, but also so far out. And what I mean is, we have seen lots of real promise and applicability on the research side, right? I used to work a lot in applying AI to medical imaging, right? And we show how well AI can actually handle images and actually give you really insightful, great insights from images, great for rote tasks, of which we have a lot in medicine. But then I think the process of translating that technology into real world impact means generating evidence. This is not like a consumer space, right? Like if the product malfunctions, there are real consequences, right? Real harm done to patients. And so we need to generate evidence that whatever technology we have, whether it's AI enabled or not, is effective. And so, the need is there, there's clear demonstration, but the translational path, I think, is not quite there. It's not fast enough. I mean, it's there, but it doesn't handle the volume and the cadence that we can improve. Oh my gosh, healthcare. It got really dark really quickly. Technology just decided that I was not in this room. Anyway, so let me just finish that part and to say that like the process of translation is, I think, where we need to actually put in a lot of muscle. And so it's less about AI itself, and it's about the process of translating technologies, period.
Great point. Alexa, turn on the lights. David, your thoughts about that?
You just turned on my thing, by the way.
We could see how well it works.
Yeah.
If we unpack a couple of the use cases that Lily was pointing out, pattern recognition. If we can really have YouTube find videos with cats in them, why can we not really readily deploy AI methodologies or machine learning for radiology interpretation or pathology interpretation? These are fields of medicine associated with pattern recognition.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, no offense, I don't care about radiology or pathology interpretation. I care about improved patient care, right? I mean, that's going to be the key thing with all of them. That's the killer app, if you will. And so the problem is that we don't have structured data. Electronic health records are a bag of words. And to nobody's fault, that's where they were developed a long time ago, and they really haven't changed the underlying technology. And so bags of words are hard to put and create into structured data, and you need structured data in order to develop insight with machine learning or artificial intelligence. I will tell you that we all know, right? Some doctors are great, some doctors are good, and some doctors are average. Right there, the way that distinguishes a great and an average is better pattern recognition. I tell you, I look under the microscope, at all of my patient slides, and I can tell, even though that, the pathology says this, it's going to be more aggressive than they say. And it's just pattern recognition. So if that's the case, I know machine learning AI can do it better than me and can make every doctor great in this country. We talk about making new advances in biology and new drugs. I really believe if we can develop structured data across the country with electronic health records and with AI, we can equal care across the country, and we will probably save orders of magnitude more lives than if we developed a half a dozen new therapeutics, and it will be orders of magnitude cheaper. So that's going to be the goal now, and I think there's going to be a transition. Remember, it was a feature, not a bug, of electronic health records that you couldn't get data out of them. That has to change. Every patient is in charge of their own healthcare data. It's not their doctor's data. It's not the institution's data. It's a strange artifact that we stripe data by institution. Why is there the Mayo Clinic data set, the MD Anderson data set? That makes no sense. There's the United States of America data set. And when you think like that, we can then start to have structured data where we will all benefit. If I said, hey, listen, give me all your credit card records, give me, all of your, financial records, and I'll consider giving you a home loan. You do, even though you don't know who I am. If I say, let me use your healthcare data in a privacy protected way, right now people say, oh, it's my healthcare. We have to change that attitude. Together with the structured data, we can radically improve healthcare.
I'm going to ask you one follow-up question before I go to Bill, because you're really hitting on the key point. We have poor quality source data. We have bags of words. what is the strategy for moving to structured data in individual institutions or medical practices or at large scale?
There is no cogent strategy is the bottom answer. But I do think you're going to start to see organizations like CMS require more structured data for reimbursement. I think we saw it at the FDA. It was the first federal agency to require standard data elements for a submission, and that was fantastic at the time. I think you're going to see the electronic healthcare companies, Cerner, Epic, and others, who are going to start to convert from this legacy software, which is literally like MS-DOS from the 90s or Windows 95, to modern software in the cloud. We will have standard data elements and structured data. I think it's going to be a new revolution. We saw it with Oracle, and obviously, Larry Ellison is a big donor to my institute. In all full disclosure, that being said, Oracle buying Cerner, I think, was an enormous step forward, and you're going to start to see, advances now where data is going to be freely shared, and we're going to have the ability to really make an impact. You can imagine every academic, every person in a company who works in machine learning and AI is dreaming of getting structured healthcare data to make an impact, and it's going to happen.
We can really see it, and just to give you the MD Anderson example in terms of what we're doing is moving to synoptic reporting for radiology reports, for operative notes, and for pathology reports. And if we can put those data sets into synoptic format, by still allowing a radiologist, for example, some freedom to dictate free text, but key elements recorded synoptically, we have a way in which we can use that for research purposes. It's what we refer to internally as a first-mile data strategy rather than a last-mile data strategy. Most of us are familiar with
that strategy, but I showed that strategy that you were doing to a bunch of Silicon Valley guys and girls, and the first thing they said is, "This is amazing. Why didn't they do it 20 years ago?"
That's because we had too much freedom and too much autonomy and no focus really on how to provide high-quality first-mile data and a reliance on what you would describe as last-mile data strategy that we all knew as medical students and fellows. Okay, let's get into diagnostics. GRAIL, a blood test to diagnose cancer. This is something that we've all been looking forward to. The opportunity to avoid a bowel prep and a colonoscopy, I know, is something that's on my to-do list. So help us to understand what the technology is and what the science is behind this.
Sure. So let's just sort of level set first. What's the why behind it? Why do we need to have early detection? 70% of the cancer deaths in the United States are from cancers where there's no screening test, 70%. And when you look at the numbers, the demographics, the baby boomers aging, we know that age is one of the biggest risks for cancer. It's overwhelming. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. So we have individual screening tests that we've been using that aren't sustainable. So we really need to move to screening individuals for cancer rather than individual screening tests. So that's the why behind the early detection. So how did this actually start? It's an intriguing story. A scientist at Illuminate was looking at cell-free DNA in the blood of pregnant women and looking for abnormalities in the fetus that could be detected from the fetal DNA. And she found tumor DNA in some of the mothers. And they go, whoa, and people are right, yeah, prove it. Every one of those women had cancer. So she found circulating tumor DNA, cell-free DNA. So it was the idea that tumors themselves are shedding DNA when they set up shop in someone's body. So that was about in 2016 when GRAIL spun out. And the technology is not just sequencing DNA. We've heard a lot about DNA and we've heard a lot about regulation and so forth. We have to get beyond just DNA sequence and mutations and look at how that DNA is regulated. How's it turned on? And it's methylated. That's what switches on individual genes, the DNA methylation, it's transcriptional control and so forth. So the first piece is actually sequencing the methylated DNA in a blood sample. That's the first part of the technology. It's called bisulfite sequencing, but you can sequence these little islands, and we sequence about 1.1 million in every sample. 1.1 million. So there's a technological advance right there. How many of you all remember manual sequencing? How many ever poured a manual sequencing gel? Yeah. You know where you had CATG, your fingers were CATG and you were entering in the computer? 1.1 million. So how do we analyze that? And that's where the AI comes in. So we've been able to define a common cancer signal that's over at least 50 cancers through AI machine learning of the methylated DNA. And we can also, by looking at specific CPG islands, tell the cancer site of origin in over 90% of the cases to allow directed workup of the positive tests. So that's the technology. We have over 330,000 people that have had the test in clinical trials, so very deep research commitment. Over 50,000 have taken it commercially because it's been available now for a little over a year. Just quickly to tell the final, sort of the latest results which we presented at the European Society of Medical Oncology in September. This was a study we called Pathfinder. About 7,000 people were enrolled to see how it was implemented. That was the endpoint, the implementation. So here are the three things. We doubled the number of cancers detected from just ordinary screening. So we doubled it. And 70% were those that didn't have screens. 2, they were deadly cancers. There's some worry of, oh, you're picking up these cancers that will never matter. No, these are deadly cancers: pancreas, liver, endometrial, osteosarcoma, head and neck. And about 50% were stage 1 and 2. So our key is we want to see across all development of multi-cancer early detection, we want to see that stage shift to earlier stages. So that's in a nutshell, but I spend a lot of my time on the data piece. I mean, how can we link the data? It's such a critical piece of getting real-world data that's regulatory grade for the FDA.
David, your thoughts about this? I know that you take care of patients. How do you think patients are going to perceive this? And what are the limitations of this in a situation where we're rolling out a test, where we're trying to define using real-world evidence, false positives, false negatives, and at the same time, work on the coverage issues?
The science is interesting. It's still nascent. It has a ways to go. And I think that's the hard part now. Yes, it is available to patients who are rich, who can buy it. And what I've seen are things that can be scary. I have a dozen patients that have had significant operations or procedures that probably didn't need it. You know, there's one argument that stage 1 cancers will always be stage 1 cancers. You have to show that finding these early matters. And I think that's very difficult in many regards, rather than have life-altering surgery. At the same time, you know, when you take 100 people with known cancer, you know, only a small fraction will turn positive on the test. So many people take the test, don't go to other screenings, and end up, we've seen several with metastatic disease because they were, quote, false negatives on the test. And so I think it's very difficult. That's not a fault of the test per se. It's a fault of the people who do it, who are doctors who have no idea what it is, because it's being sold by community docs, basically. And they don't know how to truly give informed consent to the patients to understand what they're going through. And so the notion of having a nascent test that hasn't been shown to affect outcome available to people who can afford it, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense, and is being misused in that regard. That's not to say it won't work and won't be a fantastic advantage in the future, but we really have to do the studies first before you put that out there, and really cause tremendous stress or potentially tremendous procedures in an individual patient.
Bill?
You know, and David, those are great points. I mean, we do not want this test to cause undue psychological anxiety, and of course we don't want unnecessary procedures, and that's not, and we haven't seen a lot of that. Let's look at the data of what we have seen so far. The false positive rate is 0.5%, so 5 out of every 1,000 tests, and the positive predictive value is 43%. So if the odds of having cancer with a positive test are 43%. Put that in context with mammogram, lung CT, they're well under 10%, 5 to 7%. So we have looked even at the people with false positives. We've done patient-reported outcomes in the trial I just mentioned. And over 80%, even with the false positives, over 80% of them are satisfied and felt that the anxiety level was not excessive. To your point about trials, absolutely. We recently finished enrolling the NHS Gallery trial, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. We enrolled 140,000 patients in 10 months. Fastest enrolling clinical trial in history. It was faster than the polio vaccine trial. So and it's a randomized trial. So people got blood drawn, but it's randomized who got the test, who got Gallery, and who did not. So those results will be coming. I think you make a good point that we do.
By the way, the COVID vaccine trial enrolled 120,000 patients in 3 months. So.
Well, then point is well taken. But it wasn't a cancer trial, maybe. Well, neither was polio. So good point.
Lily, what are your thoughts here about how to integrate the data science with the technology?
Yeah, I mean, I by the way, I'm really enjoying this debate, and I think, at the end of the day, one piece that, I hear that's both a pain point for both people who are developing these innovative technologies and patients that could benefit but also could be harmed is that really we don't have a way to generate evidence nearly rapidly enough to show whether or not, hey, overall, because every time you take a test, there's always that risk of false positive and false negative, right? It's always this risk that you have to take, and without the right data, you're not able to really, inform that decision. And then there's a big difference between how things are run in the pristine condition of a clinical trial where you have all of the support, right, and monitoring and all that, and then what happens in the real world where you have folks that are not as well informed about the test, even clinicians, right, and then also patients who are also not as well informed and do not have as much support. So I think there's two pieces. One is how do we rapidly generate evidence? The NHS is a great place because of all the integrated, it's still one system, and yes, they're different systems, but they can integrate and talk to each other, and that's why, with the COVID work, they were some of the first to find out about, therapies that worked, right? Like dexamethasone worked, and they were able to do things rapidly because they were able to merge research and care together. And that's one piece. And then the other piece is like practically how do things play out in the real world? And I think the framework is actually thinking about those different types of ways that we're gathering data and how do we make sense of all of that and gain insights from all of that. I don't know that I actually answered your question, but because this is like these big themes, I think it's worth kind of highlighting around these two different areas where I think we need to do more investment.
Excellent points. A couple of things I want to drill down on a little bit. The first you alluded to, and that's the role of patients. How can their voices be incorporated into the generation of solutions here, and what David, I think, accurately describes as use of their data? Lily, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think this is a key piece, and I think other folks on the panel have alluded to this, is that participants or patients, we keep screening for this type of cancer or that type of cancer, right? It's like, well, I'm at risk for all kinds of cancer, right? Well, maybe not prostate. But, I'm at risk for all of these kinds of cancers. Like, how do we, screen people for the thing that they care about? They care that they don't get cancer, period, or that that's found early, period, right? So I think that's one super interesting concept. Another concept is that patients generate lots of data outside of care and outside of research, right? How do we capture those experiences, right? And also, how do we capture the experience of going through a therapy? So let's say I'm on a drug, antidepressant, and I'm actually losing sleep, and sleep is actually really important to everything else. But we don't know this because we're not actually measuring the thing. Like, you don't measure sleep in a care episode in a patient visit, right? So how do we measure all of these things that contribute to well-being for a patient? And I think all of this, in order to do this, there needs, now I have a kind of a little strong of opinion, which is there needs to be the ownership of the data needs to centralize around the patient, right? Because they are the connection points for all of these different sources, whether they are a Mayo patient for a certain period of time or, Sloan Kettering for another time, they are that central organizing force for all of it. I understand why it's so hard to do that, because the patient itself, like the patient himself or herself, they don't have an IT team like Mayo does to build a system that's organized around them. But I think technology has made it possible that, like, you have a Google account, you have a Facebook account. We actually do centralize around the consumer or the user or the patient. So it is possible. We just have to figure out how to implement in the right way. And then we also need the other stakeholders, to buy in, right? Because, like, it's incomplete if we don't get the care data. It's incomplete if we don't get, if you're in a trial, the COVID trial, that data. So I think we need to agree that the patient matters, the person matters, and that we need to try to get more and more people who believe in this and to join in. I don't think everyone will agree all at once. I don't think that's pretty quixotic. I think you have to convince people to join over time.
Sounds like a religion.
It is. It's a bit of a cult. You got to believe it. And if you believe it, it might just happen.
During COVID, we were part of a team that developed a program called vSafe, where every person in the country had the opportunity of clicking on a QR code and entering the side effects they felt. That data enabled us to have data on pregnant women and breastfeeding women who were excluded from the clinical trial. And so several months after launch of the vaccine, we were able to get FDA approval for them from this. And it's really the first time that we collected data after a drug or a therapy or vaccine in this case was approved by the FDA. The notion that clinical trials stop when they stop arbitrarily at a certain time point makes no sense. In the oncology world, 60 to 70% of the drugs we use are, quote, off-label, and we don't collect any data. So the idea that real-world evidence is inferior to stuff on a clinical trial, again, is something that has to change. Every patient should be given the opportunity of being part of the cure or a way of improving the treatment for a disease.
How do you get the health systems to buy in?
They have no choice. It's not the healthcare. It's not the health system decision. It should be the patient's decision. That's the point.
It should be. That is exactly right. But that's not the way it plays out. As we try to get real world data, it's like, no, you can't have the data. Can a patient do exactly what you described with a Gallery test? No, they can't. Because the systems will not let that happen in some cases. So I think that's because it's our data. So how are we going to get past that? Because that's such a critical component to the real world. We have to be able to look to see the real world implementation and what happens. We have to get those data. I totally agree, but it's hard. I think it's harder than doing the AI, to be honest with you.
David, your thoughts on how to optimally integrate patients. I think we agree on the notional concept that the data belong to patients. But how do we help them to understand that, and how can they opt out in the future from specific uses of their data?
There's this ruling that came about called HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability Act. Sounds very sexy if you think about it. It's like taking a suitcase somewhere. But in reality, it was meant to protect the safety of patients and the integrity of their data. Unfortunately, it's been interpreted. It's not the law, but it's the interpretation of a hospital's doctor, it's HIPAA, we can't touch the data, we can't play with that data. And I think there really needs to be a new sense of patient bill of rights. And I think at some point we have to go that direction. The patient has a right to their data. The patient has a right to be part of research, extra institutions. So it's not just at that hospital or that institution they're at. And I think that's where things are going. You're going to see it. The UK is the worst example there is, right? In the UK, the hospital doesn't own the data. The National Health Service doesn't own the data. The individual general practitioner owns the patient data. And it's a remnant of something from 25 years ago. And that has to change because it literally makes no sense. That individual practitioner can sell their patient's data, but the patient can't have access to their data. That's not right. And so I do think we're going to evolve to a point, and I think there are a lot of meetings coming up where we're going to get toward this patient bill of rights, and it has to happen. Technology has given us the ability, and it's really an inflection point, right? We now have the cloud to store things, which is remarkably secure. We have the ability of privacy protecting the data like we never have before. So technology is going to enable us to liberate this data and have it used for public good.
Without getting into too much detail on the technology, do you see like cloud-based solutions or blockchain technology as ways in which individuals can retain ownership of their data or control of their data in ways maybe that they don't imagine today?
I have two words for that answer. Hell yes. If you look at it right now, right, my hospital, I'm not going to say which one we're affiliated with, is a small hospital. It's got some IT people who are really well-meaning, but no offense, they're not very good. And you think they have the ability of protecting their patients' data? How many hospitals have had ransom, payments this year because somebody has taken over their data? Once you transition to the cloud and have literally the top security experts in the world maintaining our healthcare data, it's going to be much more secure than it is now. And technologies, whether they be blockchain or other technology that enable you to have custody of your data from multiple sources, are available today and will be implemented hopefully in the next year or so. I hope grand scale.
Terrific. I want to move to the talent dependency associated with this future state. We've heard in the course of this conference how mathematics and biology are being merged. Computational biology is really a field. Biologic phenomenon can be described by mathematical equations. We are competing for talent with industry and with other sectors, and we can't, at least on the provider side, we can't compensate at levels that attract data scientists that get paid millions of dollars at Google. So what are the solutions that we have to attract the talent beyond the mission? We know
Google and Verily has set up a fund to subsidize hospitals paying for their AI and their machine learning people, right?
Did we decide that just a moment ago, David?
You hit a critically important point. You're right. Human capital is required for all of these things. And unfortunately, the draw of Silicon Valley has been tremendous on many of that capital. What I'm seeing now, which to me is one of the great positives of COVID-19, is people are leaning toward meaningful work. Whether it be working on a health project at Verily or Google or working at an MD Anderson is more attractive than working on selling a widget or figuring out which movie you're going to choose next. And I have seen in the last year when we would have positions, we would have one applicant. Now we have hundreds, all of whom are tremendous. And that's a big change that happened toward the end of COVID-19, that this new generation wants meaningful work or meaningful applications for their work.
I agree with that. We're absolutely seeing that people are seeking purpose and meaning in their work. And we see the same thing as people come to us because of Data Science Institute in oncology, that kind of work. And they are tired of writing algorithms to sell more socks or refrigerators. They want to unlock a lot of the mysteries that are hiding on inside our freezers and on our servers right now.
Exactly. And there's a point mentioned earlier today about more effective interactions with industry. And I think that academia can do that. Having come from academia and now in industry, there's a lot of opportunities. And in order for us to scale academic discovery, we're going to have to be in industry. So, so I think trying to get that continuum more set will help get us more training, because it's a critical need that you just mentioned.
Lily, as you look at that, and that was such an excellent point that I completely agree with, the partnership between academic institutions and industry. As an industry person, how do you see that right now, and what are the ways in which you could choose an academic partner?
I think, so well, in my old role, we worked with academic partners all the time. I think, one of the things that when you're trying to do a research project in particular is that if you're not working with the end users and the clinicians and their patients, you're going to run off in the wrong direction pretty easily. And it's a huge waste of time and those large salaries, I suppose. Because you solve the wrong problem, right? Like healthcare is non-intuitive. And so that partnership between academia and medical centers and industry, I think is really critically important. I think another place that has been really great for us is as we are partnering with people, it's actually, there are folks that we can actually train and help gain the new skills, I would say, to do a lot of the things that the computer scientists and the other folks here can do. You don't need a Google computer scientist to train TensorFlow models, right? That is TensorFlow, and as well as other competitors, are open source. They're high school students that can actually train the models. So the model training isn't actually the hard part anymore. It's the data underneath and the labels underneath, right? And so if we can get that piece right, all the other things become much easier, and you'll have a lot more people that can help you with that. But the data piece, like I joke that like 80% of my old team, and actually probably my new team, is cleaning up the data, right? Because it's just in these, like we get them from hard drives, they get mailed in and it doesn't make sense. So I think that's the big piece where if we reduce the amount of almost manual labor that is required to implement technologies, we just make it easier for everyone. And that iteration speed will compound if we can get that infrastructure piece right. So I think it's not as hard as we think it is to get people who can build AI. It's way harder to get the data right.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, what's wild is this happened before, right? Is that people who worked in the lab and the clinic never talked to each other. Then all of a sudden, translational programs that happened at hospitals like MD Anderson and others, and we're able to get things very quickly from the lab to the clinic. Now, the people who collect the data and industry need to be one team. We're all fighting the same freaking disease. So it is nonsense that they're not on the same Zoom calls in today's world, not talking together. Did the sun just set where you are or something? Or you were too still and the lights went off? But this is the new era. And I think we have to get over this notion that there's the dark side, which is industry, and there's the academic side. We're all one. And, without industry, you have no new drugs or treatment for disease. Without academics and hospitals, you have no samples and data of which to develop them. So the two are necessary for each other to succeed.
Such a great point, because we know that you need the clinicians on the front lines to define the use cases, as opposed to industry to work in a vacuum, in a silo, and present the solutions. That was the problem with IBM Watson. That was the solution, trying to find a problem, and it didn't work for a lot of good reasons, because people in the clinic were never involved at the inception and in the design. And if we can find ways to deepen the connection and refine the use cases and solve for the problems that the patients are experiencing, we'll all be a lot better, and we'll move faster, farther, quicker. To come back to the data dependency and the talent dependency, these are two really important points, because we have poor quality data. We have what David describes as bags of words. We have data scientists that come to institutions and spend 80% of their time cleaning up the data and 20% of their time analyzing the data. We have a lot of work to do on the quality of data or the data supply chain, so that we can give data scientists clean data all the time and reverse the time allocation that they spend at the moment. Put them 80% of the time on analyzing the data and 20% of the time cleaning it up. On the talent dependency, I'm just wondering from the two of you, David and Lily, if we need to go down to medical school training, where we don't really have tracks, and when bioinformatics is an old field that isn't quite what we're talking about today, and where we have to inspire young people who are thinking about a career of medicine and then marry data science in the ways in which we had biomedical science fused with medical training. Is that an opportunity that we're missing out on right now in medical schools, David?
Again, 2 words, hell yes. No question about it. My son is a first-year medical student, and, I look and it's almost embarrassing watching. Don't tell him I said this, but, they're learning to memorize. He's doing infectious disease now, and he's memorizing every bug in antibiotics. You've got this little device where he can Google that and then, use his brain for processing things and thinking about things and learning bioinformatics better, learning statistics, learning how to structure data. That's where we need to put the emphasis. We teach toward tests. We have these things called boards. Medical schools get graded on how well their students do on the boards, which has nothing to do with taking care of patients. Do you want a doctor who can memorize things really well, or do you want a doctor who can talk, is empathetic, and can think and process? I'd certainly rather the latter.
Well, we could get onto a tangent or a pathway here that's super important, but I'm completely aligned with your thinking. We have old school methodology anchored in the last millennium that's based on organic chemistry and MCAT testing to bring people into medical school. We do not screen for compassion and empathy or communication skills. If we had emotional intelligence as a criterion that we selected for, you would get a totally different kind of medical student. And if you accepted the reality, everything that medical students need to know, which used to be in textbooks and required memorization, is now on an iPhone. And you simply need to know how to curate and cultivate information that you can pull up on an iPhone and test people for the ability to explain that in plain language to patients. That's really a totally different way of thinking about medical education. And the thing that's holding us back is exactly what you pointed out. It's test scores in U.S. News and World Report ranking.
I do autopsies on all my patients who pass away from cancer. And I learned a tremendous amount. I have a feedback loop, right? I thought it was scar tissue in the lung. It turned out to be cancer. I couldn't understand why there was short of breath, and there's a single layer of cancer cells circulating in their alveoli in their lung, and they can't get oxygen in. I learned so much from it, but we've lost all those things, right? We've moved to the pure knowledge where we just want to say, what is the answer? How can I Google it and get to that? We need to go back to the art of it and learn it. And then you need to understand what that data really is. We don't have standards for the data. Lily calls it a fractured leg. I call it a broken leg. So no matter how much we try to harmonize our database, they may be a little bit off.
Going back to the education, I think how we communicate with patients and the need for specific communications, like we heard from Rob Wynn. I mean, we have to be able to teach our students the empathy, getting trusted messengers into the right communities, to educate about new technologies. And because if we're going to implement these new technologies, we need to really have those discussions about what are the pros, what are the cons, and how we can see that this is for the greater good. And I think we're getting that's being lost with the test scores and the rankings, no question.
One other area that I want to drill down into relates to the use of algorithms in clinical medicine. And one of the areas, of course, that we've looked at is the identification of patients who have sepsis in the hospital. And as these algorithms have been deployed, we've uncovered a new field that's referred to as algorithm bias, where algorithms that are developed in one institution or by one group of researchers on one small subset of patients don't appear to work very well when they're applied in other settings. Lily, what are your thoughts on how we can avoid that? Because it has a lot of implications to how we develop the algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's real world data in connected systems. I think, there's this concept of like post-market monitoring, right? And for devices and algorithms are sort of basically software as a medical device, right? There's opportunity to actually be looking at how they perform even after approval. And these are all like these devices actually, they're served maybe through a cloud-based, but they're connected, they can be connected, and you can actually get real-time or near real-time analysis on how things are going. So instead of relying on an adverse event, like a post-market surveillance, which is when an adverse event happens and then you report and it takes forever and then you respond, you can actually see hotspots where there are deviations from performance, right? So I think there's two, to answer the question actually more comprehensively, there are multiple ways of dealing with bias. The first one is before you even build a product, right? You're actually doing the work in the communities where you want to deploy this algorithm. Your training data represents a wide variety of participants and what they go through to actually access care. And so from the design aspect, you can actually prevent some of the stuff from happening. Also on the design side, you can actually start looking out for where to look. Right? Once the algorithm's deployed, if you're going to monitor, you actually have to know where to look. You can't search for everything. There's no such thing, right? And so if you notice that, hey, older folks tend to struggle or have worse results with this algorithm, you actually put that in the design of the product, and you say, post-market, we're going to be watching this one very carefully, right? And in fact, every time we go to a new site, we go live there, we're going to increase monitoring, and then so that we can respond if we need to, right? So when you want to get that post-market and the continuous monitoring right, you have to design for it from the beginning. So I think we have to think about it as a continuum, but that last piece about looking at how a product actually performs in the real world when it's used off-label on a different population that it was originally intended. That is what happens in real life, and we need data on that right now, and we shouldn't ignore that data. So I think it's really great, and I think the problem though is how do we incentivize manufacturers like industry to do that, right? Because I think the great part of some of this stuff is that if you're able to get that data about off-label use, you could maybe expand your indications, right? So there are win-win situations here. We just need to prove those pieces out and make it clear what the win-win is for everyone in the situation. Obviously, the patient, as the main stakeholder, but also everyone else that's involved.
I agree with everything you said, Lily. The one thing I would add is just transparency on the root data. That it's very important that you're very transparent to what the data was you made your algorithm or your decision upon, so others can say, does my patient fit that data set?
Yes, absolutely. There are these things called model cards. Sorry to interrupt, but they're model cards. It's kind of the nutrition facts of the model, right? Like, what went in there so that you can also make decisions there. So that's a really good point.
And the final thing, I agree with everything. The final thing I would add would be simplicity. So when you're getting the post-market data, how can you get the data easily, simply, without clinical trials or this? How do we get that in? I think that's a challenge for us, being able to get that and have it be regulatory grade.
Great points, superb discussion. Let's go to the audience for audience questions now.
Good afternoon. Chris Stewart, a retired social behavioral scientist, and have dealt with many of these same issues on DARPA programs of cleaning, munging data, and the limitations, the fundamental limitations that we have in this area because of not being able to use common data sets. And I guess one of the questions is, and I was at a National Academy session, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and really eye-opening when we were talking about the genetic testing and obviously the costs going down, but it wasn't really until we hit 700,000 cases that we began to see the right kinds of patterns to begin to understand the genetic code. Now we realized long read sequencing is more important, or is valuable. We've also realized junk DNA is important to look at in between and the implications there. So I guess one of the questions is, how are we going to do the power analysis? How are we going to get to the numbers to crack the code that we need to do? Because I know from a trust framework standpoint that patients aren't going to be willing to share their data in the volumes that we want. And I've worked on dynamic consent, I've worked on those sorts of issues, and it is a wicked problem.
Terrific question. I guess I'll go, Lily, to you for the thoughts on this. How do we get to critical mass with high quality data so we can get to exit velocity here?
Oh, such a good question and such a hard problem. And thank you for asking it. I think, and thank you for, I think there are two ways that I would think about this. The first one is, how do we deliver value to patients, participants, in such a way that they will want to do this? The reason I think about this is, confession, I play Pokemon Go. I still play Pokemon Go. I know we did it in 2016, it's kind of a thing in the past. They have 100 million people engaged playing this game, and you run around a city with your face buried in front of you. Have you ever played in this? And you look kind of ridiculous, but there are adults playing this. I say I play with my kids, but there are adults playing this, and there is a value that is exchanged, right? And so we do have lots of different apps and other things that engage users or give value back to users such that they will want to do certain things. And so I think, I don't know we have the answer, but there are other industries that we can learn from about how to give users value in such a way that they will want to engage. I think that's first thing. And also recognizing that people aren't coin operated. It's not just about giving people money to do the thing, right? Like, I don't get money to play Pokemon. In fact, I pay money to do this thing, right? So it's not just about money, it's about other things. And so we have to think about value broadly. So that's one piece. The other piece is interoperability, right? So we've got a few hundred folks who are excited to do stuff here. We got another few hundred folks that are, here, and if you aggregate it over, you aggregate over multiple academic centers, multiple manufacturers, you actually have you may have lots of data. They just are lots of people that are interested in, right? Interested in helping, but they just have all these different kinds of data, and we can't make them work together, right? We have people like Army of Women. We have women who are willing, hundreds of thousands of women who are normal women that are literally willing to get biopsies, right, to help with something like this. So I can't imagine I think we can activate the people, but when we do activate folks, we have to make good on the promise that their donation is going to multiply beyond one single study. So I think those are the two ways that I would try to address the problem, but I acknowledge this is a big problem and we have to figure it out.
Okay, I reduced that to gamification and altruism. Okay, next question.
Dr. Agus, to your point, Yasit Virisuri, I represent an institution that trains a lot of nurses, wrote memorization and board exams. The National Council on State Boards of Nursing is revising its assessment next year for the national boards and testing the high levels of cognitive testing and clinical judgment, and essentially just changing the way they test. It's going to be a milestone change. But you treated Steve Jobs. First question, how was it to treat him? And number two, you have some thoughts about supplements and the impact on cancer. Would you comment?
David, over to you. Hold on.
To date, there has yet to be a study showing a benefit to a vitamin or a supplement in a normal individual in this world. And so certainly I'm not a believer in taking things without data. We are a complex emergent system. So the notion in a reductionist way, take this will happen, doesn't make a lot of sense. Steve was a remarkable man. I think, I'll end here because I think it's a very important note, is that, he said to me once, why can't you look at my cancer that I like to code, and where there's an error in the code, I can correct it, and then everything is okay. And I think it's a very prescient thing is to try to, get reductionist in cancer. We tried to do with genomics, and it got us a little bit ways there. We have some certainly molecular targeted therapies that have had benefit, but it has not solved the problem of cancer. We have a long way to go, and it is a complex emergent system. And so the way to get to complex emergent systems is to have large data sets. And you don't need an understanding necessarily of all the biology in order to make an intervention that has a benefit. And I think that's the way we're going to go.
think we have time for one more question. Anna, you get the last question.
Well, this may not go over well, but I'll ask it anyway. So, first of all,
I expect that of you.
Yes, of course you do. So, with all due respect, I want to ask Bill a question about this assay that is so infamous now. It's on everybody's mind. And I will say this before I ask my question. You know, in my mind, we have invested enormous amounts of our resources in creating molecular data sets and wildly popular cellular assays, et cetera. Having said that, most of that work has gone toward identifying new targets for therapy. And so I think we should be thinking about how does that apply to prevent cancer and how is that going to apply to detect disease very early. So that's all for saying that I think this is a good idea. And I think it will play out as a good idea. But the question I have for you is, why are you doing this as a laboratory developed test and selling it before you had the data to actually know? And I'm asking the question based on the fact that laboratory developed tests will be regulated very soon, I think, by the FDA. The VALID Act is being actually talked about today in Congress, as a matter of fact. And I just wonder why GRAIL didn't go to the trouble of actually pursuing this test as a PMA from day one. Why did you choose to sell it under CLIA versus going after the approval for FDA?
So
I told you you wouldn't like the question. So.
No, and it's a good question. I don't have all the answers for you in the few months I've been at GRAIL. But what I can tell you is that this test is picking up cancers that are making a difference now. My eureka moment was a 2-centimeter body of pancreas cancer. As a pancreatic cancer surgeon, I've never seen that. So we are making a difference in local control if we're not making a difference in survival. A 2-centimeter hypopharyngeal cancer, the Mayo Clinic called about that. They go, we've never seen it. What do we do? Do we need to radiate? What do we do? So I think there's efficacy that we've been seeing. The actual the decision between LDT going straight for PMA, I don't know all the details why that decision was made, but seeing the efficacy and seeing it in so many thousands of patients, hundreds of thousands of patients, or implementing it in hundreds of thousands of patients was our logic. Sure, and the question was, for those who weren't on the microphone, is this like the shades of Elizabeth Holmes, et cetera? And we get asked that a lot. This is not a drop of blood without a lot of data. This is very, very deep science that I believe, and I believe that the technology is going to spawn a lot more than just early detection, because we haven't looked at regulation. We've focused on DNA and DNA mutations, and that's a fraction of the problem. It's regulation. And I believe that those methylation profiles are going to identify subsets of high-risk people down the road, probably predict who responds to therapy for immunotherapy. So I think that's the broad spectrum of this. So our broad, deep approach to over 400,000 tests so far in 330,000 clinical trials, I think is a very deep approach that is far different from the other approaches you described.
I want to just acknowledge the richness of the discussion and thank our panel. It's just been a terrific panel. We could have gone on for 2 more hours, and you can see by the depth of the issues and the things that we were just scratching the surface of. This is a super talented panel. I want to thank David, Lily, and Bill for their talent, their time, their thoughts. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank all of our program participants again over the last 2 days. Thank you. And what a great way to conclude. I could have listened for another 2 hours. I think just concluding with the emphasis on the future, it kind of ties back to what Dr. von Eschenbach was saying yesterday, using the past to influence the future, and that's the point of this conference and really what this is all about. So I hope that you all found this beneficial, and now I want to invite everyone to join Dr. Will Lee in the gift shop, where he will be signing copies of his book, How to Eat to Beat Disease. I also invite you all to follow the Nixon Foundation across social media, our handle @Nixon Foundation across all social media. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you back here next year in 2023. Thank you.